All right, here's my piece of advice. Strong piece of advice. Whether you use an iPhone or an Android, I strongly recommend that you store your contacts and your calendar in Google, in Gmail, in a Gmail account. If you don't have a Gmail account, sign up for it. I don't know why you don't. We're going to cover a lot of the features of Gmail and Google and why I recommend it over something like the Apple infrastructure and iCloud. So the first thing is this. This came up, and it's come up several times. Somebody switching from an iPhone to an Android, and they had their contacts stored in iCloud. They didn't move them over. They didn't really understand where they were. And so suddenly they're having to recreate all their contacts because they don't have access to their iCloud. And you can get to it and do an export. But the truth is, if you store your contacts and your schedule in Google, it's going to be available regardless of the infrastructure you go to. So if you're using Gmail to store your contacts and you move from Android to an iPhone and you just connect it to your Gmail account, you'll have all your contacts there. And it also comes in handy with other services that use the Google infrastructure. So that's where you want to store them. I'm giving this strong piece of advice. Do it now before you get too far down the road and suddenly you lose a bunch of data. So I'm going to show you how I use Google Calendar, and then we'll talk about some of the other features over this week and next week that I think you should look at and why everyone should be using Gmail at some level for collaboration and working with other people. So I use Gmail for my company email as well, which is what I'm going to demonstrate for you. Anyways, hope you enjoy the video. If you do, let me know. If you have a question, let me know that as well. If you disagree with my assessment on using Google versus iCloud, I'd love to hear why. I probably won't agree, but give it a try. Thanks. All right, when looking at Google Calendar, the first thing I want you to see is just the view that you can set up. So I work in a week view. I like to see one entire week, Sunday through Saturday, at a time. And the reason I do and work in the week view is it still shows me the time slots, but I can see a more complete kind of vision of what's going on for the week. Now you can change that. It's got a day view, week view, month view, an entire year view, plus a schedule for seeing appointment. That's a whole different feature that we'll look at. And then it's got this custom view. And I set mine to 4 weeks, but you can actually set this in your settings. And I'll show you where you can set that, but I'll also explain why I want to see 4 weeks at a time. So let's take a look at that. I can see 4 weeks from the current date. And the reason that's kind of nice is if I had to move an appointment down 3 weeks, I could do that. I could just move that appointment down to the 8th, and there it is. It appears on that date. So I'm going to drag it back up to the date in question. We'll get to that in a minute. But if I go under my settings, under the general settings, not the specific calendar settings, which are down here, the general settings, here's where it lets me set the custom view, and I could set it to 2 days, 3 days, whatever, all these options, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So if I set it to 3 days and we go back and take a look, now it's in that view, a 3-day view. Alright, I'm going to go back and set it to 4 weeks and then show you how we can still get a 3-day view if we need it. And this is kind of important. So let's go into settings. And I want to show you a couple other specific settings I would take a look at. So, once again, click on that. Get down to our custom view, set it to 4 weeks. But then specific to every calendar are the notifications, and this is an important one. So you want to set up your default notifications. When you create an appointment, how soon prior to that appointment will you receive some kind of notification? So by default, usually they do kind of a 10 minutes. So if I go down here and I say event notifications, I add a notification. By default it says a 10-minute notification, but I can set that to almost anything. Or I can set multiple notifications. For instance, let's just say I want to receive a notification that I have an appointment coming up, and I want every single one to be 40 minutes prior, and then have one that is 5 minutes prior. Having both of those available, that makes those the default settings for that calendar. And once again, you could set that for every calendar. I'll explain my phone reminders calendar, which is kind of a special calendar that I use. But let's go back to the calendar itself. And now if I go to well, first of all, let's look at this one that I created earlier, this appointment. So it's picked up those default settings, 5 minutes before, 40 minutes before. Now if I go down here and set another appointment, and we look under more options, and we see our default appointments. We can always change it. I don't need the 40-minute appointment if I don't want to have that. I can also change this, manually override it to 10 minutes. And then when we look, of course, on the calendar, we hover over it, 10 minutes before. Now, these other items here on the calendar in red are actually my task. We can change the color, but I'm going to keep them red. They are tasks. They're kind of a different kind of appointment, like a private list of to-do list, as it were. And so it used to be that Google Calendar only provided them at the top, like an entire full-day event. They couldn't be set up at a specific time. But you can see I have one set up here now at 11 a.m. on Thursday. And so I can now set tasks, which are kind of, once again, private to-do lists for me. I can set them at a specific time. And when that comes up, what you have is you have the option to create an event, which is a regular calendar appointment, or a task. So when I create a task, you can add some notes here. And one thing you'll notice is when you create those tasks, they now appear, of course, in the left-hand or the right-hand sidebar, not under Keep, which is a note-taking app, and we'll look at that another day. They show up under the task. And I could edit them here. I could even add them here, but it's kind of a hassle. So I don't really worry about that. But here's why I set a 4-week custom view. This allows me to very easily, let's say I called Jim, we had a short conversation, and he said, call me back in 3 weeks. I can just drag him right down here. 2 weeks, go down there. Okay. So now he's on that Monday, on the week in question. And I can choose to move him to this Monday, wherever it goes, right? And that's true for appointments as well. So I can take this and move it to May 1st, and now that's all set up with reminders. And if I'd invited anybody to that appointment, they would be notified. That's how I use Google Calendar and my 4-week settings. It lets me plan things out pretty easily. Well, let's go back to a week view. And let's just say we wanted to see 3 days at a time. And this is where you can start to use your left-hand calendar to really fine-tune how you work with your calendar. So we're looking at the 22nd. If I wanted to see 3 days, I can click and drag across those 3 days, and now I'm looking at a 3-day view. And so if I wanted to move things in that view or create new appointments, lets me do it. And so you can expand that. I hope you see the capability here is if I wanted to see, for instance, 2 weeks, I click to the left and drag straight down, and it automatically highlights 2 weeks. And now I'm in a 2-week view. If I wanted to see past weeks to move things forward, for instance, if I hadn't moved appointments forward that didn't happen, I could view 4 weeks at a time from a prior week. And I could then scroll forward, and it will go to the next 4 weeks, for instance. Let's go back to today's date. It's still showing me 4 weeks because that's what I've highlighted, which is the same as my custom view. But I don't need to use the custom view. I can look at any 2 days. It doesn't have to be the current date, or any 3 days, or any 5 days. And I can work with those days. Let's just say I wanted to plan my weekend, and I wanted to see the entire weekend, including Monday. So I started dragging on the Friday and dragged down to here. You don't have to drag across even. That's one thing important. Once you click and hold your mouse, you've anchored it. So if I click on the 24th. Well, let's go back to today's date. So let's just say I wanted to show this weekend. If I click on the 26th, I don't have to drag across to get the 27. I click and hold down. I just drag my mouse directly over to the 29, and that's what's going to be highlighted, the sequential days. So I click, drag, let go, and now I can kind of plan out my weekend. So I can set appointments, whatever it is that I want to do. So the things that are important to note is your custom view, to set that under your settings, to set your default reminders, and to start using tasks that give you a specific time if you want to use that. I find it to be a very functional feature. In the next video, we're going to take a look at some, Google Keep and some of the features that it provides. But this is how I start to use Google Calendar. And once again, my big point of contention is whether you're using an Android phone or an iPhone, I recommend you use Google for your calendar and for your contacts.